The other is that we know that cultural narratives, the prevailing cultural narratives of our society, do not tell or paint the whole picture for how households of color are doing. And this report really gets into that when it really pushes back against the concept of the model minority for AAPI communities. So that's another really important reason why this research is out. And then the other important thing is that it provides really concrete and actionable recommendations that policymakers and partners in the financial services field can actually implement and move forward on. So what's going to be the agenda of this webinar? So what you're going to do, you're going to hear a little bit from the folks from National Capacity about this report and what its findings are. We're going to hear a local perspective from a practitioner that can give the findings of this report some real on-the-ground context. We're also going to hear from two policy experts about what we can do to really address the issues that this report raises. So with that, I want to provide a brief introduction of our speakers for the webinar today. The first speaker will be Kiran Ahuja, who is the Executive Director of the White House Initiative for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Kiran is responsible for directing the efforts of the White House Initiative and the Presidential Advisory Commission for AAPIs and to advise federal agency leadership on the implementation and coordination of federal programs as they relate to AAPIs across the executive departments and the agencies. We also have Afreen Alam, the Executive Director of Chaya CDC in Jackson Heights, New York. Afreen has extensive background in community development field and recently joined Chaya staff after working with the National Urban League and their We also have Joe Valenti, who is the Director programs addressing financial asset building needs in Latino and AAPI communities, including the expansion of capacities, housing, counseling, and asset building networks nationwide. Jane and her team is responsible for the creation of the Scrimping and Savings report that you'll hear a lot about today. So Jane, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can give an overview of the Scrimping and Saving report.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for your introduction. I'm really happy to be here to share with you the results of this very groundbreaking report. So as background on National Capacity, or the Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, our mission is to improve the quality of life for low-income Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders by promoting economic vitality, civic and political participation, and racial equity. We work closely with a membership of 100 community-based organizations across the country who bring decades of experience working to improve the economic health of low-income Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders by implementing community-based solutions and bringing about policy change. Today, I will be presenting data about National Capacity's report, Scrimping and Saving. This report takes an in-depth look at how various factors such as age, ethnicity, English language fluency, and immigration status influence how Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, are able to access the financial mainstream. By increasing access, our goal is to help community members to avoid costly transactional services that operate at the fringe, remove barriers to accessing bank accounts and other financial products that facilitate savings and help people to build credit, and to open up opportunities for community members to invest in their future. This report was made possible by key support from the National Council of La Raza and City Community Development, and we would also like to acknowledge the UCLA Asian American Studies Center for assisting with the data analysis. Next slide, please. So the data that I'll be presenting today is based off of a collection of surveys that were conducted in 5 different cities across the country with over 2,000 respondents. The surveys were conducted in 7 different languages: Bangla, Chinese, English, Korean, Nepali, Thai, and Vietnamese, and were administered by community organizations that are part of National CAPACD's network. They include Chaya CDC, who's represented on this call today, the Chinese American Service League in Chicago, Illinois, Chinese Community Center in Houston, Texas, and the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, Korean Resource Center, Thai CDC, and Empowering Pacific Islander Communities in California. I should say at the top that this report is by no means an exhaustive look at all the diverse AAPI communities. Only helps to open up where I think there are many questions to be resolved, and also to be supplemental to other research that has also been conducted in the community. The data contained in this report builds on our earlier work, such as the Spotlight on AAPI Poverty, as well as a previous report released in partnership with the National Council of La Raza and the National Urban League Banking in Color that looked at financial access for communities of color more broadly. Scrimping and saving builds upon that research and provides a more nuanced understanding of the conditions that contribute to growing economic inequality in the AAPI community. So what we found in the research is that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are less likely to turn to outside sources for financial advice and have a heavy reliance on family and friends. This is regardless of immigration status or income. We also found that community-based organizations were significantly underutilized as a resource. Recent immigrants were particularly vulnerable, with 23% stating that they didn't know where to turn to at all for financial advice. Next slide. Unsurprisingly, Asian Americans and Pacific Islander immigrants are also more likely to be disconnected from the financial mainstream. Despite the fact that AAPIs are generally well-banked as an overall population, non-citizens were least likely to be banked as compared to their U.S.-born and naturalized citizen counterparts. This is unsurprising given that both language and cultural barriers, as well as presumably smaller social networks and less familiarity with the U.S. systems. So 94% of U.S.-borns were banked compared to about 86% of non-citizens. In addition, we found that most AAPIs do not know their credit score. On average, 68% of respondents did not know their credit score, despite about 74% of respondents owning and utilizing credit cards. We also found that there was great variation about credit score knowledge by ethnicity, which you can see in this chart here. So without this access to financial products, it is not surprising that cash is still king. 74% of respondents report using cash for daily financial transactions. Use of cash was particularly pronounced amongst more recent immigrants for such transactions. 26% of respondents overall reported not owning any credit cards whatsoever, with women more likely than men not to own one, limiting the use of credit to help individuals smooth their monthly cash flow or potentially fill temporary gaps for emergencies. Next slide. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders were also found to be more vulnerable to financial emergencies. 23% of respondents did not know where to get emergency funds if they needed it. This is of significant concern because of the vulnerable position this leaves them in to access predatory services like payday lenders. For example, the FDIC found that 18.7% of Asians and 27.2% of Pacific Islanders reported using alternative financial services in the last 12 months. From this graphic, you can see that there remains a strong reliance on family and friends for emergency funds and a growing reliance on credit card advances, a growing concern given limited knowledge about credit, which we talked about earlier. And then on the next slide, finally, as we think about the future of financial services and how people access them, we definitely are thinking about how communities are using and accessing technology as a tool to facilitate their financial capability. We did find that, in fact, 75% of respondents reported having access to the internet. However, 74% of those individuals do not use online banking. Unsurprisingly, the elderly and those with lower incomes, lower levels of educational attainment, and lower levels of English fluency were least likely to use online banking. Privacy remained one of the primary concerns for why people chose not to use technology. So given all of this data, we've learned that as we develop strategies to ensure that low and moderate income Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are part of the financial mainstream, one thing is clear: trust is key. Thus, each of the following recommendations seeks to build trust between Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, financial institutions that serve them, and the government entities that propose and enforce policies to protect them. Our first recommendation is to increase language and cultural accessibility at financial institutions to ensure individuals can access information and maximize the benefits of their services and products. Financial institutions should not only hire more staff that reflect the communities that they serve, but also seek to ensure that documents that people are signing off on are understandable. Bricks and mortar locations are definitely a key institution in neighborhoods and communities for facilitating this access. Next, community-based organizations are a key partner in increasing financial access and information. Low and moderate income AAPIs are already turning to these service providers for other needs such as ESL or English as a second language, workforce readiness training, small business counseling, housing counseling, and that they all represent opportunities for bundled services. Private foundations, financial institutions, and government should acknowledge the significant needs that exist in AAPI communities and expand their investments that build the capacity of these trusted resources in the community. Taking this a step further, we should design services, financial products, and educational programs that leverage the role that family and friends can play in promoting financial health. For example, we should capitalize on peer lending circle products or other similar models as a way of promoting savings, building credit, and building a stronger support system for new immigrants. Financial institutions and practitioners in the field can further this work by innovating new peer and family-oriented products. But funders can support the expansion of these models into more communities. And finally, we encourage federal agencies to strengthen consumer protections that limit predatory products and help make the financial marketplace safe for new immigrants, those with limited English proficiency, and all other consumers that may be vulnerable. Further, federal agencies should integrate strategies for encouraging greater asset building and asset protection throughout their social service infrastructure. That concludes my presentation for today. For those that are interested in reading the full report, it is available on our website at nationalcapacity.org. With that, I'd like to turn my time over to Afrima Lam, the Executive Director of CHIA CDC in Queens, New York. CHIA was a key partner in helping National Capacity to administer these surveys and to pilot test various solutions for addressing the needs outlined in the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane, for the opportunity to speak today. I am Afreen Alam, the Executive Director at CHIA CDC. CHIA is a community-based organization. We are located in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York City. We are 15 years old, and we specialize in serving not just South Asians and Asian Americans, but the immigrant population that Queens is known for. And it was quite an exciting opportunity for CHIA to participate in this survey because it allowed us to validate what we were already seeing in our offices. It allowed us to experiment our thoughts and program ideas out in the field. And more importantly, the survey participants actually started thinking about their own finances as a result of the questions that we had asked. So I'm going to sort of complement what the findings that Jane had mentioned by giving you a little backdrop of our asset building program first. So the mission of CHIA's asset building program is to actually organize and assist low and moderate income immigrant New Yorkers. And the goal is threefold. It's to achieve, protect, and preserve assets and create pathways for intergenerational wealth building. So the intergenerational wealth building is an important component, particularly because we have seen such erosion of asset and wealth in our community since the foreclosure crisis. So as we envisioned and built up our asset building program, that became a key component. The comprehensive program in our asset building includes everything, really, from comprehensive benefit screening to tax filing assistance to citizenship application, because we know that once people become citizens, it actually is connected to the increase of their wealth up to 17%. We also have peer lending circles that I will talk about, as well as ESOL classes, career coaching, and then connecting people to resources that ranges from entrepreneurship and small business development to incubating co-ops, workers' cooperative. So essentially, the asset building program at Chaya is almost a linchpin of all the other programs, because we really try to address the fundamental challenges that people have, not just with direct services, but we also include organizing and policy advocacy component. I'm sorry, I think I just got a message from Emmanuel that there is some problem with my phone line. I'm not sure how to exactly address it, but I'll try to speak closer to the microphone perhaps. So I will start with the peer lending circle. Chaya has been experimenting ways to access wealth building tools, asset building tools for a while now. We had an IDA program where we had matching grants for low to moderate income community members. And after a few years, we had realized that this really was not culturally appropriate approach, because people simply didn't have any trust in free monies. However, a peer lending circle is a culturally appropriate idea, and once we started implementing a peer lending circle where people make small deposits, and then they take out the loan to actually either for their studies or for their small business needs or for personal needs, their lending actually gets reported to the credit bureau, and they're able to also build up their credit. So one example I'm always sharing with people is of this recent immigrant family. The father was having quite a bit of trouble building up credit, and it was related to the kind of tools and products that were not available to him. And he joined our peer lending circle, helped build up a credit history, and after a year, he was actually able to get a car loan, and that car enabled him to increase his income by about 20% in the very first year. So a small peer lending group, gradually led to an income increase for a whole family. And that really speaks to some of the underlying implications of Jane's, or the finding of the study is that, yes, language access is an issue. Yes, our community is not receiving culturally sensitive tools, but that all speaks to the product that is available or not available to not just Asian Americans, but immigrant communities in general. What are we able to offer these low to moderate income families? Are they really addressing the needs, the shortfall in income, the gap that they have at the end of the month, that they are depending on the check cashers or the loan sharks in the local community to make that difference up, and also the fee structures that the banks provide. The check, when the checks bounce, they sometimes have to actually count on their, writing an overdraft because they know that they will need that coverage, but the overdraft fees are exorbitant. So how can we design products that actually meet that need on the front end, but also how can we ensure the income generation is solid in our community. Those are some of the things that came out from our experience with this survey and the report. And the other piece that Jane also alluded to is related to the education piece, how we get our information, how we use the information. So our informal network is the key way that people get information about products and services. And we as community-based organization needs to sort of formalize that informal avenues by creating ambassadors of delivering information. It's harder to find people who will come into an organization that they don't know, but it's easier to create ambassadors from the organization who can reach out to the community. So the outreach to the community is a vital component for our success in this program. And we are really looking at it as an ambassador for financial justice, where we deliver the information via the conduit that are trusted. And sometimes when we first begin, it's not us. Eventually, Chaya does become the trusted conduit, but it is through our trusted channels as well. So with that, I think I'm going to end my piece, and I really want to thank Jane and Jeremy for giving me the opportunity to talk about Chaya today. Thank you.
And thank you, Afreen, for sharing with us the incredible work that Chaya is doing in New York City. It's really important work, and we really thank you for it. And also understand that a lot of that work is really changing a lot of the policy in New York City, and that's where we're going to move now to talk a bit about what the implications of this report tell us about public policy. And before we go any further, I do want to remind everyone that it won't be very long until you'll have an opportunity to enter the conversation and provide some comments and questions. So if you'd like to do that, please ask your question through the chat box, and we will go through them, and then we will make sure that your question is asked to one of the presenters. So with that, again, this part we're going to have a facilitated conversation in which I'm going to ask some questions of our two next speakers. Again, it's Kiran Ahuja is the Executive Director for the White House Initiative of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and Joe Valenti is the Director of Consumer Finances at the Center for American Progress. So Joe and Kiran, welcome to the webinar. And I'd like to start it off with a question for Joe. And Joe, one thing that really comes out in the findings of the report is the issue of language access. And what do you think advocates should do to push policymakers to make changes either at the legislative or administrative level to really facilitate better language access for API communities from financial institutions?
Thanks, Jeremy. Again, my name is Joe Valenti, and if you're not familiar with the Center for American Progress, we are an independent, nonpartisan policy institute that is dedicated to improving the lives of all Americans through bold, progressive ideas, as well as strong leadership and concerted action. I'm glad you raised the point of linguistic diversity. And I'm very glad to see that CAPACD's report allows us to drill down on this. I would say if we want to look to a model in the financial services community, we should look at what the CFPB has done around its language access plan, which was released late last year. And I know a number of organizations on this call provided feedback to the CFPB's proposal. We need to think particularly about what regulators are doing, particularly given congressional gridlock, and what regulators, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted by feedback. I'm not sure where that came from. I think it's over now. Sorry about that. And to look at what regulators are doing and to weigh in on proposed regulations. So the CFPB Language Access Task Force includes members of the community who are, I'm sorry, is the feedback still there?
Yeah, Joe, this is Jeremy. For speakers that are not speaking, please mute your phones. I think that'll take care of the feedback.
All right, let's try again. Excellent. Sorry about that. So the CFPB has proposed a language access plan that was released late last year, and it includes a language access task force, which includes members of community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and other community partners that are well-connected to the needs of communities facing language barriers. The CFPB has also looked to promote materials in a number of native languages, including through digital and social media. And that's also key because we know that advertisements in ethnic media in particular sometimes break through barriers in, break through communities in promoting products that may or may not be appropriate or may be expensive or predatory. One recommendation that we also made for the CFPB's language access plan was to make sure that language preference is incorporated into the CFPB complaint database. So the problems that families face in the financial marketplace are not hidden because they're not able to convey the problems that they're seeing.
Thanks, Joe. So the next question is for Kieran, and what I wonder is around, on this issue of language access, how could community members advise or offer feedback to federal agencies that regulate or govern some of the financial institutions?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. And it's good to be on the webinar and share some of the work that we've been doing. And I think it nicely intersects with a lot of the speakers with the comments they've been making throughout the webinar. So I think just briefly for folks who don't know about the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we were created by executive order in 2009 to support and really increase access to federal programs and services across the federal government, especially for vulnerable and underserved Asian American Pacific Islander communities. You know, one important way, if you'll see on the screen, is we have a very robust senior level interagency working group, which is kind of the meat of the initiative. And a big part of the work that we do is encouraging community organizations, you know, whether Asian American Pacific Islander or otherwise, to engage with us through this interagency working group. You know, many of them are Asian American Pacific Islander appointees. Some of them are not, and just also CFPB was recently added to that list. So you'll see kind of a range of different issues and obviously scope of work among these agencies. So, you know, one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit more deeply with the IWG, if we could go to the next slide, is that I think what is really important and really, I think, you know, an important part of this conversation is that all of these agencies are mandated through our executive order to create what we call agency plans. I mean, essentially they're, like if you think about your organization, a strategic plan. And we've tried to really streamline this process where they're focusing on some key issues. So in the past, you know, we've had about 24 federal agency plans. They've focused on capacity building, data disaggregation, workforce diversity, and of course, language access. And almost every one of these plans, I would say actually every one of them, has a goal around language access. And I think what Joe is talking about, you know, with the CFPB language access plan is something that all agencies have to do, not even as a part of the work that we do with the White House Initiative, but there's also a standing LEP executive order that is kind of harken back to the Clinton administration that is enforced by Department of Justice. And many of those agencies have to submit those plans for review The office within Department of Justice that resides in the Civil Rights Division has a very robust slate. They're very active in engaging with agencies to ensure that these plans are in place, and also plans that provide an opportunity for I think real meaningful language access. And you know, we can talk about, and I'd love to hear folks with some of their questions, because I do think, you know, and I'm sure Joe has kind of run into this with the CFPB, is that, you know, for many of the agencies, a lot of these plans look very different when it comes to what they're going to be doing around language access. But I think, you know, what I thought was interesting with what he was talking about was that, you know, CFPB had a very much of an integrated community, played a role in providing feedback on that language access plan. And some agencies have done that, some have not. And I think it's a great way to you know, kind of engage in that process. But once that plan is there, that, you know, or it's been kind of formed, does not mean that that engagement should stop. I think, you know, these are I see these as living documents, and, you know, where there are opportunities based on examples of, you know, something that has gone awry, or, you know, where community interests are not being met, you know, that those plans themselves could be tweaked. And certainly, you know, people live outside of those plans. So it doesn't mean just because it's not in the plan, a particular department should not be kind of working on expanding access, whether it's translating documents or providing interpretation services. So, you know, I'll stop there just as far as, you know, whether it's opportunities through the initiative or just generally the LEP executive order. I will just mention and say that our agencies are now going through another iteration of a 2-year agency plan, which will give another opportunity for community orgs to provide substantive feedback. Last time we did this on idea scale, where folks could write substantive comments, or they could do thumbs up or thumbs down if you just didn't have time to go through that administrative process. So we'll probably do something very similar this time around to encourage public comment and feedback.
Thanks, Karen. That's incredibly helpful and really great resources. So I hope everyone had an opportunity to take down that website that's on the screen so that they can get engaged. This question is for both of you, Joe or Kieran, whoever would like to answer. And really, it's about, you know, what's really evident from the report is the extent to which access is so difficult for many low and moderate income folks. And I'm going to add a piece, is like access and utilization. You know, some people have access, don't have access, but some people have access, but for some reason or another, they're not utilizing the financial products that are available to them. So just interested to know about any strategies that you all think have been promising in promoting greater access to low and moderate income API communities, and then once access is there, really increasing utilization of products. So either Joe, Kieran, whoever would like to jump in first.
Joe, why don't you go ahead, and I'll follow.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Joe.
Excellent. That's a fantastic question, and I think there are really a few different points that we need to think about. We do need to think about whether products are culturally and linguistically appropriate, as we discussed. We also need to make sure that products are high quality and low cost, and we've seen a lot of new developments both in checking accounts. I'm thinking of the City Access account, but other products by a number of banks, as well as a number of prepaid cards that are safe, that are affordable, that are low cost, and that give families access to branches and ATMs and an entire infrastructure where they can easily manage their money. And some of these products are connected with other opportunities. Both the Department of Education and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau are currently looking into the financial products that are available on college campuses and that are marketed to college students to make sure that their starter accounts are truly appropriate for them and can lead to longer-term participation in the financial mainstream. But I'm particularly excited about the administration's MyRA, which is a starter retirement account that can be opened with as little as $25 and makes it possible to have automatic savings for retirement without worrying about risks in the market, and also giving savers some flexibility if they do need access to those funds in the short or medium term. So we need to think about these types of products that are safe, affordable, accessible. We also need to think about the prevalence of some of the wealth-stripping financial products that have come up in today's discussion, whether it's payday loans or auto title loans, products that take money out of communities and ultimately make it harder for local nonprofits and social service organizations to help their customers. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau released an outline of future regulations in this market back in March at a field hearing, and we expect a fuller proposal to be released sometime this fall. And so we need to look at the wealth stripping products. We also need to look at how we can make savings pay. And what I mean by that, there are two types of barriers that really affect utilization of these products. One is asset limits. Families receiving public assistance may run the risk of losing their benefits if they have savings above certain thresholds. And even though some of those limits have been relaxed in recent years, there are perceptions that remain that having money in a savings account, having money in the financial system can ultimately hurt you. And we also don't do enough to encourage banking and savings for low and moderate income families in the tax code. If we look at the billions that are spent in tax expenditures every year, for every family in the highest tax bracket that puts $2.53 in a retirement account, that family is saving $1 in taxes. For a typical middle-class family, it takes $7 of savings in order to get that same tax benefit if they're able to benefit at all. So we do need to think about some of the broader tax policy changes that will better reward savings and make it a better proposition for families.
I was just, yeah, sure. So don't know as much about financial products, unfortunately, and so I'm glad that's why Joe's here to kind of talk about some of those ideas. I think, where I might come from is really thinking about, whether there's, the foundations or the community-based organizations on the phone. A couple of things. We've had I think really this was set by the president very early on about promoting public-private partnerships. And really trying to align what, have been some of the investments or strategies from the federal government with what's happening out, whether in the corporate or in the philanthropic sector. And I think from that, we have tried to really engage a number of foundations in understanding some of the challenges that affect Asian American Pacific Islander communities on a range of issues. So obviously including the topic that we're discussing today, but other issues such as education and health, and many more. And there was recently, and this is kind of over the past few years, but just more recently, there was a report that was released by APIP, which is Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, that actually talks about a lot of these areas of investment where there could be these type of partnerships, including supporting, financial capability within communities. And so I really encourage folks to go onto their website to take a look at that. From that event, we're also partnering with CAPACD for an event in September 30th at the White House that's going to be focused on probably, even more than this subject today, but just broadly speaking, talking about AAPI communities more generally and some of the challenges they face moving themselves out of poverty. So I wanted to mention that, as well as I see you already have on the screen our regional network. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that because of working with CBOs in particular and trying to the crux of what we do as part of the initiative is fundamentally just in opening the doors of government to our communities. So, and I think one of the things that we've heard over and over again is just the challenges in accessing federal grants. And so we've been providing technical assistance and capacity building in all these regions. We've done about 12 of these trainings so far, and we will continue to do those in the following years. But we would love to see more, partnership with foundations and CBOs, because I do think supporting organizations to be able to access, the federal grant programs or leveraging those federal grant programs with foundation dollars or individual donor dollars. It's helpful in kind of allowing them to do the wonderful work that we've heard about today. So those are the two things. The regional network just really quickly has got about 200 federal members around the country. It's basically bringing Washington, D.C. to your backyard. There's representatives from all these different agencies. So it's also an opportunity to give them a better sense of what's happening in local communities. And they have hosted, numerous roundtables over the past year and will continue to do so in the years to come.
Thank you. And so for everyone on the phone, on the call today, know that this is going to be my last question, so you should get your questions together and then put them into the question box for the speakers. So I'm going to end with this question. We've been focused on the AAPI community today, and there's a lot of really great resources and information that we know could really help move the needle with this community. But we know that this is a large problem that affects many other communities: African American community, Latino community, immigrant community that comes from countries all over the world, and really want to dig in. If you had one thing that you could think about that would really, that folks on the call should think about, is what they can do to build a broader movement to address the growing racial wealth gap, what would that thing be?
Hi, Jeremy. This is Jane from National Capacity. Maybe I'll take a first stab at the question. I think you hit the nail on the head in that these issues that we raise as part of the Scrimping and Saving report are not unique to the Asian American Pacific Islander community, and in fact, really reinforce other research that have been done in the Latino and African American communities and other communities of color. And so these issues that we talk about around access and utilization of financial products and consumer protection are themes that run throughout. And so some of the work I think that we've been doing as part of a broader coalition of various organizations, including what we've been doing with the Asset Building Policy Network, are examples of places that we can come together and find commonality around the issues that we're working with, and to organize together to work with federal agencies and our financial institution partners to get to a place where more of our communities can have this access. But I think that is also a partnership that certainly has roots locally. We have lots of examples within our network where communities of color, AAPI communities and African American communities and Latino communities are coming together. I believe Afreen couldn't stay on the call, but as an example, if I could just lift up for Chaya CDC, that they're part of a coalition called the Northern Queens Financial Education Network. That is a collaboration with other communities of color that are looking at issues of financial education and access. And so some of those things I think have been really critical in not only moving our programs and practice forward, but also forming a coalition that can bring about policy change at the local level that perhaps can serve as a model to uplift as we push for national federal policy.
Anyone else want to take on that question?
Well, this is Karen. I think I would just add that kind of from a bigger picture, I've seen, at least this is a challenge for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but I think, has benefits for all communities of color that we've been working on really closely, is around the collection of federal data by all the different agencies, and a big push from the AAPI community is around further disaggregating that data across the board, not just for Asian communities, but for Hispanic, African American, as the diversity in this country grows and grows, and really kind of building our more nuanced understanding of these communities. I think to have that kind of information available to the broader public, the researchers, those folks, to really dig deep into some of these issues, I think can only be beneficial across the board.
Thanks.
Two things I would throw out there as well. One is looking to the value of networks. The ABPN has been a tremendous resource in connecting folks across civil rights communities. as well as asset building communities. I know a number of folks on this call are also part of the Tax Alliance for Economic Mobility, which is a group of over 50 organizations thinking about tax reform and how to make tax something that's a little less intimidating and imposing. But I would also say it's crucial to be able to tell stories to local and state leaders, and folks at the local and state level make so many financial decisions that affect the lives of residents, and they don't always know about the most effective or culturally appropriate means. A good example, a couple of years ago in California, $19 million in public benefits went to ATM fees because the bank that the state had partnered with didn't really have access in a number of the communities where benefits were received. So I think if you're able to effectively communicate to local and state officials what's going on in your community, they may take that on, and they may also be champions, as we've seen in San Francisco and New York and St. Louis and other places.
Thanks. So as I said, that was my last question, and then I'm going to pass it to Jane, who's going to go through the questions that have come in through the chat box. Jane?
Great. So we have a question that I believe is directed at Kieran. If every federal agency has a goal around language access, can you talk a little bit about what kind of accountability is in place regarding these agency plans and language access?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, to be honest with us, we really kind of struggle with the accountability piece in the sense of, in some way are they penalized if they don't fulfill their goal, or if they're not able, to put in as a robust of a goal. I think what, under the executive order and as a part of this mandate, we really, and through some of the public comment process, we really do try to provide that kind of external pressure on all of ourselves, right? We know we all kind of respond well with that. And that's why it's so particularly important to have community organizations engaged when those agency plans are put together and when we ask for that feedback, because if they don't really see the community responding, they really, and again, this is probably just, kind of how, unfortunately, public institutions work, is that, they oftentimes respond to groups that are going to be the most vocal. And I think that that's why it's so, I think there's a huge benefit with having the initiative here and coordinating all of that, with having the LEP executive order. And then also within us, we try to promote kind of healthy competition and promoting best practices and thinking about creative solutions that we've seen and sharing those with the agencies. But nothing replaces the importance of having groups, whether in the Capacity Network or just broadly speaking in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, to be engaged in that process when it happens. And I oftentimes find that groups are so busy on the ground, which is so important, and definitely understand groups being stretched, but those are the groups that know exactly what it means when those when those documents aren't translated, or when websites aren't translated, or when proper interpretation services are not being provided, or there's challenges with that information is not reaching the agencies more directly. That would be my way to really encourage that, part of that accountability mechanism is absolutely to have people engaged in this process, more so than what I've seen over the last few years.
Great, thanks, Kieran. At this point, we don't have any other questions in the chat box, so this is your last opportunity to ask questions. I think that's it, Jeremy. I'm going to hand it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining the call. I hope that it was as informative to you as it was to me. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties in the sound quality. We'll be sure to clean that up for the next time that we have a call like this. But I do want to say in closing that there's no other issue more important than the one we've discussed today. I don't see how we as a country can move on and be competitive in the world, if we're not taking care and making sure that all of our citizens are economically prosperous and are able to move up the ladder. And that includes every group across the country. And in essence, if we don't figure out how to close this racial wealth gap, we're not going to make any dent, and all we're going to do is hold the country back in all. And this is really what has inspired the Asset Building Policy Network to come together and do this work together for African American communities, Latino communities, the API communities, and really all communities. We're working together to move a set of policy priorities forward. Includes tax policy, as Joe talked about, some of the predatory lending and wealth stripping things that we know are out there in the market, and we really implore you to join us in that effort. And as I said, you can go to assetbuildingpolicynetwork.org. That's one way in. Another way in to join us is through one of the member organizations, through National Capacity, National Council La Raza, CFED, Urban League, and Leadership Conference or Policy Link, or Center for Community Center for American Progress. So with that, I will close. If you have any questions about the report itself, feel free to reach out to either Jane or Joyce, and their contact information is on the screen. And with that, I'll close the webinar, and thank you very much for joining us. And again, thank you for your patience with some of the technical difficulties. Enjoy your day and the rest of the week.